first keynote speaker for today, Professor Andreas Contillion. He is a professor of environmental economics in public policy, director of research, Department of Land Economy. Professor Andreas is also research lead at Cambridge Centre for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance and Director of Studies for Land Economy, Trinity College, Cambridge. Additionally, he is also a co-founder of BIEOCON, the largest academic network on the economies of biodiversity conservation. It is a great pleasure to have him with us today. So, I would like to call upon Sir to give us some insights. Please, Sir.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. May I ask, can you hear me well?
Yes, sir, you're perfectly audible.
Yes, okay, great. Let me just very quickly share my my screen, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this should be it. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, well, let me just first start by thanking our gracious hosts, the IIM Bodh Gaya, for this very kind invitation, but also for putting together this very interesting and engaging event on sustainable development goals. What I want to do in my talk, and I understand that I have roughly about, is it about 15 minutes? Is that correct?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. So let me just put a little timer here as well, just to be sure that I don't overrun. Okay. So what I want to do in my talk today is talk to you about carbon credits in tropical ecosystems and whether they are a friend or foe for sustainable development goals. Are they our friend, or are they something we should worry about? Carbon offset credits are playing an increasing role in climate change policies, but also in generally in meeting sustainable development goals. The question I want to ask today and contribute to this discussion in this conference is whether these particular carbon credits, and in particular a flavor of these carbon credits called voluntary RED programs, are meeting their environmental targets. I don't want to focus too much on the specificities of voluntary RED programs, but I want to draw some general issues that will be of more broader concern to this particular audience. Are these carbon credits working in terms of reducing deforestation and retaining carbon, and therefore
this meeting is being recorded.
And therefore alleviating pressures on the environment when it comes to carbon? The general contribution of my talk, it has to do with what is the role of evidence-based policymaking in meeting sustainable development goals. To what extent and what is the role of evidence-based policymaking in this process, and what do we mean by evidence-based policymaking? So I'm just going to use my work on voluntary RED programs as an example of this to motivate some discussion. So very quickly, what do we mean by RED and RED Plus in particular? We mean, the acronym, if you like, means reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. There's a plus at the end of this acronym, and that concerns the dimensions of these particular type of carbon offset programs that have to do with primarily with the sustainability that they entail, and that they are supposed to also improve livelihoods and, of course, enhance forest carbon stocks. In essence, these programs, they're a form of payment for environmental services. You pay some entity, this entity could be a farmer, or it could be an entire community or a region, in order to provide a particular type of service. And what is the service? Service to retain carbon stocks in their land. There are two main ways that we do this in these carbon offset programs, or as we call them, RED Plus. The first type has to do with forest avoiding deforestation. And here we pay someone in order for them, in essence, to deforest less, or maybe deforest not at all. Okay. In the second type of RED program, we pay people to reforest areas, that is to plant trees. And in doing so, what happens? Well, they're retaining an amount of carbon in their lands, which would have been emitted in the form of deforestation. As we know, when we chop down trees, we are in essence releasing, therefore emitting carbon into the atmosphere. If we are paying someone to keep the trees intact, in essence, we are avoiding this type of pollution, okay? And this avoidance of pollution, we can partition into carbon credits, and we can sell them. Usually, the amount of carbon sold in one particular carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon. So this is, if you like, the product which is being sold when someone buys or sells a carbon credit. In today's talk, I will mostly focus on avoided deforestation, okay, as my example. There are also, again, 2 types of RED programs with respect to how centralized or not centralized there are. You can have centralized programs, which are, in essence, part of government initiatives, but we also have this booming part of the market, which is the decentralized RED programs. And these are, in essence, voluntary carbon markets that have emerged, where sellers can sell carbon credits. That is, they sell the fact that they are retaining tons of carbon in their land. And who buys these things? Well, people who voluntarily, these could be people, agencies, they could be investors, who voluntarily want to purchase these carbon credits. In order for these markets to work, there are some kind of accreditation agencies that have to certify that these carbon credits are real and meaningful. For example, one of those is Verra, which will issue a VCS accreditation signaling that a particular carbon credit being sold is in fact real. And in today's talk, I will focus on these decentralized approaches to RED. Now, is this RED something that we should really care about? Well, we should, because carbon credits are booming. Globally, you have companies like Disney and all the big companies, Delta, the transport companies, etc. They are purchasing carbon credits. Also, the context, the environment, the policy environment is very favorable for carbon credits, in particular because the negotiations under the Climate Change Convention have allowed this to happen. In particular, Article 6 of the convention opens the gate for carbon credits to be developed. And in fact, last year, the voluntary carbon market surpassed the $1 billion mark, the $1 billion mark, and there are calls for this market to increase by 100 times, okay? Not 10 or 20, by 100 times by 2050. So in about 30 years, this should be over 100 billion, okay? In terms of sales, the volumes of sales. So let's go back to the initial question, but I'm gonna reformulate that in a way that a scientist would. And I'm gonna ask, what are the impacts, and I stress the word impacts, of these voluntary RED programs or projects on deforestation? To answer this question in a scientific and valid way, and therefore contribute to the evidence-based and policymaking, we need to think counterfactually. We need to ask this particular question: what would have happened to forest lands that are under RED had they not been under the program? What would have happened, that is, to the same lands had they not been subjected to these RED payments? So to do this, in essence, what are we really comparing? We're comparing an area of land which was subjected to RED. We can call this a treated area that has treated with this intervention, and with land which was not subjected to this program, and we can call this a control group. So in essence, we're comparing RED areas to other control areas that were not subjected to the RED program, but somehow are similar, okay? They have similarities. That is the trick. How do we do this? We need to use impact evaluation methodologies, okay? And there are many methods we have nowadays to do this. In essence, the different types of methods, but in essence, what they all do is they all focus on this control area. They try to find comparable comparison groups to compare an area that has been subjected to a particular policy. In our case, it is the red plus policy. Counterfactual thinking is important for causal inferences. Without it, we are getting correlations, but correlation is not causation. Without counterfactual thinking, we won't know if red plus programs, these carbon offset programs, are working or not in halting deforestation. And hence, we don't know if they are contributing to mitigating climate change. We need this type of counterfactual thinking if we're going to go away from advocacy towards evidence-based policymaking. Okay, especially as scientists, as myself, our role in society is to help the policy debate through evidence and not through my personal opinions, okay? Because that would be advocacy. Now, there are very few, interestingly, although this market is booming. In fact, some people, if you go to Google, there are, and you look for videos, there are presentations of how people are urging investors not to buy Bitcoins, but to buy these carbon offsets, okay? So despite the boom and the interest in these carbon offsets, very interestingly, there are very few independent assessments as to whether these things are working or not that actually think counterfactually, all right? That think in this idea of whether it is the actual intervention itself which is doing which is causing the change, or whether there are other confounding factors. However, nowadays we have methods and data that allow us to look into these questions. I will present just two examples from studies I've done. I'm just going to give you the results, so I'm not going to go into any detail, to show you what we have found and how this can motivate and help the policy debate. We use a particular type of methodology called the synthetic control matching methods. These are novel statistical methods, and also we make use of publicly available high remote sensing satellite data. And we are, in essence, assessing if REDD+ has the desired effect on deforestation. We've had REDD+ for over 10, 15 years, which means now we have a lot of evidence. We can go back and see, are these programs where we pay people to retain carbon in their land so that others can emit the equivalent amounts in another economic activity, are they working or not? Just to give you a cleaner idea of exactly what we're doing, on the vertical axis in this simple diagram, we have the amount of forest cover, and in the horizontal, we have the amount of time, okay, the passing of time. When these REDD programs are developed, some kind of baseline assessment is undertaken of what would be the amount of deforestation that we project in the future. How many trees, that is, would be cut down? How many acres of forest would be cut down? Let's assume that the projection is this down-sloping curve, okay? And that shows the amount that the forest cover will diminish because we have deforestation. If you introduce a program where you have no or very little deforestation, through REDD, for example, then you will be avoiding deforestation and therefore avoiding emission reductions, and then these avoided emissions can be sold as carbon credits, right? And this is the shaded yellow area. This is what is being sold. Fine. However, let's assume that there's some error in the initial estimation of this expected baseline, okay? Because it's an estimation, it's a projection of what we believe deforestation will be. And let's say that the actual one is this middle line here. Then the real carbon credits that we should have been selling are the yellow shaded area, and the gray shaded area are ones which we sold, but they're not really additional. They're not really real, if you like, carbon credits. We are paying money for nothing. All right, these avoided deforestation, avoided deforestation, and avoided carbon emissions didn't really materialize as a result of REDD. With a series of collaborators, we've undertaken a few studies, and I'm going to present just the punchlines, the results from two. One is from data from Brazil, where we analyzed 12 such REDD programs that have been around for over 10 years. And another one is a cross-country comparison, a more recent paper, where we looked into 6 different tropical countries in different continents. So we went to Africa, in Asia, and in Central America, and we looked into 27 projects. In all cases, the data allowed us to construct valid counterfactuals using the methods that I briefly mentioned before. What did we find? Well, very interestingly, we found that roughly 75% of REDD projects have not reduced deforestation in comparison to their counterfactual. So if you do it right, if you do the statistics correctly and compare the treated areas with their comparable control sites, you find that they have not reduced deforestation. Most carbon offsets lack additionality. Roughly 94% have very little additionality. And for projects that did reduce deforestation, our estimate suggests that reductions were substantially lower than claimed. All right. To give you a flavor, in Peru, for example, we found that the project had helped conserve 686 hectares, but the projection was 3,661 per year. In Colombia, even worse, there was roughly 50 acres preserved, and roughly 2,550 was the target. How can we explain this? Maybe the baselines were wrong. Maybe we have issues with these methods that estimate the baselines. It could be that there could be confounding factors that haven't been appropriately estimated and accounted for. That's because this counterfactual thinking hasn't been used. Maybe there is strategic inflation of the baselines. That is, those agencies that sell the credits overemphasize the threats of deforestation in order to be able to sell more carbon credits. Or it could be that conservation efforts in red areas have not been as effective as we thought. So what are the implications for sustainable development goals? I want to stress this type of scientific evidence does not undermine the idea of REDD+, nor generally of nature-based solutions, nor do we want to put down the accreditation agencies, okay? What we want to say is that we need better governance measures for these nature-based solutions to work at scale, and that evidence-based policy, in particular, evidence-based policy that thinks counterfactually, is a key for achieving sustainable goals. Thank you for your attention, and I open the floor for discussion.
If anybody has any questions, please go ahead. So can you please check the chat box? There is a question over there.
Yes, okay. Isn't the global north taking advantage of carbon credit market for resorting to ecological dumping, aggravating a north-south global divide, giving way to exploitative of perverse comparative advantage? Very good question, all right? Are these carbon credits kind of a free pass, if you like, to the global north at the expense of the south? And that is primarily a kind of a fairness question, if you like, and it's a valid one. The type of research I'm undertaking doesn't necessarily answer that question. Well, what it's saying is that even, let's say that there is some merit in using carbon offsets, all right? What we're observing is, because of the lack of credible scientific evidence, we are developing a market where we don't really know where we're going. Evidence suggests that these things aren't even working. Even if there was merit in using them, we need to pause, take 2 steps back, and reevaluate, even if at the effectiveness level we are achieving our goals. Not to mention fairness, which is the great point you're mentioning. So even at the effectiveness level, these things are problematic.
Thank you, sir. If anybody else has any question, please, you can ask. I think there are no more questions, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and being with us here today. It was very informative and indeed an insightful session.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, proceeding with the session, with great pleasure, I would like to call upon Professor Abhiral Kumar Tiwari to announce the Best Paper Awards. Please, sir.
Thank you, Rodoshi. Good evening to all. I have been given a very difficult task now. Around 250 papers were presented, and our entire team of faculty members and session chairs were involved in finding out the best papers. And it was really very, very difficult to choose the 3 out of 250 papers that were presented. Finally, we have come to conclusion, and I'm going to announce the 3rd prize, which goes to Kavita Kambose and Nawal Kishore for the paper titled Assessing the Effect of Customer Perceived Values Towards Organic Food, the Moderating Role of Media Exposure to Food Safety Issues. उधर दिखाओ सर, इस पे डिस्प्ले नहीं है। अच्छा इधर है, उधर नहीं, मैं उस उधर देख रहा था। Okay. Now I would like to announce the 2nd best paper, which goes to Navinan, Srinidhi and Abhishek for the paper titled Digital Financial Inclusion, Green Credit, Green Investments, Green Energy and Sustainable Economic Growth, Evidence from Emerging Asian Economies. And finally, waiting time is over for the best paper. The first and the best goes to Preeti Roy, Suman Saurabh for the paper titled Does the ESG score during uncertain environment offers substantial opportunities in Indian stock market? Thank you to all of these authors and paper presenters. Now time has come to propose the vote of thanks, and we are ending towards end of this conference. A very good evening to all the speakers and enthusiastic participants of the International Conference on Sustainable Goals, ICSG 2022, which was organized in association with CEE NRG, Cambridge Center for Environment, Energy, Natural Resource Governance of the University of Cambridge. It gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this event to all the dignitaries assembled here, offline and online. I would like to extend my thanks to Professor Dr. Vinita S. Sahai, Director, IIM Bodh Gaya. Under her leadership guidance, the entire event was organized successfully. We got constant support and guidance from you. Many thanks, madam. Now I would like to thank Professor Andreas from CENRG, University of Cambridge, for agreeing to jointly organize this conference. Thanks a lot for the collaboration. Sir, we are grateful to you. Next, I would like to thank our eminent keynote speakers, Professor Robert Pfaff, Professor John Godel, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Sachin Mangla, Professor Andreas, and Mr. Aziz Taibi for sharing their knowledgeable insights with our participants. All of them really enjoyed your sessions and were very appreciative of the learning received. I would also thank our editors, Professor Shunghwa Pa and Professor Xiong Ho Law, Professor Sachin Mangla, Professor Manish Gupta for sharing their valuable inputs on the points to be noted by researchers, right from the ideation to the paper submission in a high impact factor journals or high ranked journals in ABDC or ABS categories. I thank pre-conference workshop trainers, Professor Madan Lal, Professor Amin Liani, and Professor and my brother Olini for providing the training support and guiding the participant to choose an appropriate method for empirical analysis to fill the research gaps. I would also like to express my heartfelt thanks to my fellow co-convener, Professor Archana Par, looking into each and every details of this event and constantly working very hard to make the 4 days event successful. I also thank my dear faculty members and staff of IIM Bodh Gaya to provide the back-end support. I am extremely thankful to Chairperson Student Affairs for helping in organizing, providing support with student volunteers. My heartfelt thanks to our first batch PhD student, Mr. Arvind, whose support was praiseworthy for providing the entire support of really implementing the event along with their core committee of students comprising of IPM and MBA batches. The first international conference on sustainable goals saw a footfall of 250 authors who shared various budding arenas of sustainability. The success of this conference depended on participants and the constant sharing of ideas and thoughts among them. I thank all the session chairs who provided constructive feedback to the paper presenters and selected the papers for publication opportunities either for a journal or edited book to be published by world scientific publication and international publisher. Once again, to conclude, I thank you all, the trainers, the keynote speakers, the editors, director madam, fellow colleague, participants, IT department, admin, PR team of IMBG, and constantly working ICSG team for making this conference a great, successful, and reality. Hope the same will continue in coming years. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir, for the insights and your kind words. With this, we have come to the end of this enriching experience. Before we disperse, I would again like to thank everyone involved in making this conference a huge success. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
The recording has stopped.